On the morning of Sunday, March 20th, 1927, a 9-year-old girl in Queens Village, New York, slept late. Her name was Lorraine Snyder. She had been at a bridge party with her parents and had not got to bed until 1:45 in the morning. She normally woke at 7:30. That morning, nobody came to get her. When she finally woke up, her mother was on the floor of the hall outside her door. Her wrists were tied. Her ankles were tied. She said burglars had knocked her out and left her there. The house had been turned over. Drawers were out. Their contents were all over the floor. And in the main bedroom, Lorraine's father was dead in his bed. Within 2 hours, some of the best detectives in New York City were standing in that house. They looked at the drawers, they looked at the doors, they looked at the woman on the floor. And one of them said, more or less, that it did not look right. She said she had been struck on the head and out cold for 5 hours. There was no bump. There was no bruise. There was nothing on her head at all. The ropes on her wrists and ankles had been tied so loosely they had not left a mark. No door had been forced. No window had been forced. Whoever came in had been let in. And the jewelry she said had been stolen was under her own mattress. That whole list came together inside a single working day. But the thing that finished it was a pin, a small one lying on the bedroom floor with 2 initials on it. A detective matched those initials to a name in her own address book. He asked her one question about that name, 4 words, and she answered with a question of her own, which was whether he had confessed yet. He had not. He had not even been found yet. By the end of that night, both of them had confessed, and the initials on that pin did not belong to the man they arrested. They belonged to a woman who had died years earlier, and who is the reason this marriage was broken from the start. This case took the police about 6 hours. It took a jury 1 hour and 40 minutes, and it produced more newspaper coverage than anything in America that year. 2 of the most famous crime novels of the century came out of it. This is the Snyder and Gray case, and it is not really a story about a clever plan. Queens Village, New York, March 1927. A husband of 44, a wife of 32, a corset salesman from New Jersey, and a life insurance policy the husband did not know he had. The newspapers called it the sash weight murder. One reporter called it the dumbbell murder because of how dumb it was. There was a 9-year-old girl asleep in the house. She is the only person in this story who did nothing wrong, and she lost both parents inside a year. If you are new here, this is Cold Case Redemption. Most weeks we cover cases nobody solved. This week is the opposite, and that is exactly why it is worth an hour of your attention. Because the interesting question here is not who did it. It is how 2 ordinary people talked themselves into thinking this would work. Subscribe and stay with me. It starts with a marriage and with a photograph of a dead woman on the wall. Albert Snyder was born in 1882. He was a serious man with a serious job. He was the art editor of a magazine called Motor Boating. He had been in publishing his whole working life. Everyone who described him afterward used variations of the same word, dull. Before he met his wife, Albert Snyder had been engaged to a young woman named Jessie Guischard. She died before they could marry. He kept her photograph. He named his boat after her. He kept a pin with her initials on it. He also told his wife, more than once, that Jessie Guischard had been the finest woman he ever knew. Ruth Brown was born in 1895. Her father was Norwegian, her mother Swedish, and there was no money. She was 19 when she met Albert Snyder at work. He was 32. They married in 1915. She was 20. He was 13 years older. Their daughter Lorraine was born 3 years later. In 1923, they moved out to Queens Village, into a house Albert Snyder bought. By any measure of that decade, Ruth Snyder had what women were told to want. She sewed slipcovers for the furniture. She made dresses for her daughter. She kept the house. And by every account she gave afterward, and by every account he gave of her, she was miserable in it. She was 28, and she wanted to go out. He was 41, and he wanted to stay in. That is not a crime. Half the marriages in America looked like that in 1923. What made this one different was the photograph on the wall, and the boat, and the pin. She was living in a house with a dead woman she could not compete with, and her husband made sure she knew it. I am not excusing anything. I am telling you what the record says, because the record is unusually clear here. In the summer of 1925, she met a man at a lunch counter in Manhattan. Henry Judd Gray was 33 years old, and he sold corsets and brassieres for a manufacturer. He lived in East Orange, New Jersey. He had a wife. He had a small daughter. He taught Sunday school. He belonged to the Elks. He wore rimless glasses. If you had asked anybody in East Orange to name the least likely murderer in New Jersey, they would have named him. The affair ran for about a year and a half. They kept a suitcase at the Waldorf Astoria, and I want you to hear this next part properly, because it tells you more than anything else does. Ruth Snyder brought her daughter with her to those hotel afternoons. Lorraine, age 7 and 8, was sent to ride up and down in the elevators with the operators while she waited. That detail came out at the trial. It did more damage to Ruth Snyder than anything the prosecution said. They wrote to each other in code. They paid a postman to handle certain letters. And in 1925, Ruth Snyder went to see an insurance agent. Albert Snyder signed one policy. He believed he was signing something much smaller than he was signing. 3 policies ended up in place. The largest carried a clause called double indemnity. That clause meant the payout doubled if the death was violent and accidental. The total exposure came to something close to $100,000, and Ruth Snyder was quietly paying the premiums herself. The agent who arranged it was later dismissed and went to prison for forgery. Now, here is the part that people find hardest to believe, and it is in the trial record. Before the night of March 20th, there had been earlier attempts on Albert Snyder's life. Twice the gas on the kitchen range was disconnected while he slept. Once the garage door was shut while the car was running inside it, with him in there. His whiskey was poisoned so clumsily that he poured it away and said he needed a new bootlegger. When he was ill, something was added to his medicine. By Judd Gray's account at trial, there were something like 7 attempts. Albert Snyder survived every one of them, and apparently never once suspected his wife. On Saturday, March 19th, 1927, the Snyders went to a bridge party at a neighbor's house. Judd Gray came into the house while they were out and waited. They came home at 1:45. Lorraine went to bed. Then Albert Snyder went to bed. He was killed in his bed while he slept. Both of them later described what happened, and their descriptions did not match. We are not going to walk through it. It was in every newspaper in the country in 1927, and there is no reason to repeat it. What matters is what they did next. They pulled out the drawers, they scattered the contents, they made the house look robbed. Then Judd Gray tied his lover's hands and feet, left her on the floor, and got a train to Syracuse. Sunday morning, Lorraine finds her mother on the floor. The girl runs next door. The neighbors come. Somebody telephones the police. New York detectives in 1927 had seen a great many burglaries. They knew what a forced door looked like. Neither door in that house had been touched, and they knew what a person looks like after 5 hours unconscious from a blow to the head. She had no mark on her, no swelling, nothing. The bindings on her wrists and ankles had left no impression on the skin at all. Her husband's revolver had been left on the bed, opened at the breech, unfired. It had been placed there to suggest he had reached for it. It suggested nothing of the kind. In the basement, they found the sash weight, and under her mattress, they found the jewelry she had reported stolen. They questioned her all day and into the night. When they told her the burglary was staged, she asked them how they could possibly tell. So they told her, item by item. The doors, the knots, the head, the jewelry, the gun. What they did not tell her was that they had found a pin on the bedroom floor with the initials J and G. They had also found her address book, and under the letter G, there was an entry, Judd Gray. So they asked her, casually, "What about Judd Gray?" And she said, "Has he confessed?" He had not confessed. The police had not spoken to him. They did not know where he was. They told her he had. That was a bluff, and it was legal in 1927, and it worked immediately. Ruth Snyder gave a full statement. The affair, the planning, the night. In her version, Judd Gray had wanted her husband dead, and Judd Gray had done it. She also told them where he was. A hotel in Syracuse, New York. Judd Gray had built himself an alibi up there. A friend had helped him arrange it. When the Syracuse police knocked on that door, he laughed at them. He said it was ridiculous. He said he could prove where he had been on Saturday night. Then they told him Ruth Snyder had confessed and named him. He gave a full statement of his own within hours. And in his version, he had never wanted to do it, and she had made him. By Tuesday, both confessions were printed in full in the New York papers, side by side. The Queens District Attorney, Richard Newcomb, looked at two people each blaming the other, and he made a decision that shaped everything that followed. He indicted them together, one trial, two defendants, two separate defense teams, each of them free to cross-examine the other. Ruth Snyder's attorney called that arrangement novel and dangerous. He was right. It was also, from the state's point of view, extremely effective. The trial opened on the 27th of April, 1927, in Long Island City. Townsend Scudder presided. Richard Newcomb prosecuted. Edgar Hazelton and Dana Wallace appeared for Ruth Snyder. Samuel Miller and William Millard appeared for Judd Gray. The tabloids had discovered that this case sold better than anything else available. And what they did with Ruth Snyder is genuinely striking, even now. One paper hired a phrenologist, a man who claimed to read character from the shape of a skull, and printed his verdict on her face. Another paper hired the widow of Rudolph Valentino to write about what kind of woman she was. Her conclusion, printed in a newspaper, was that Ruth Snyder had no heart. Judd Gray got very different coverage. He prayed in his cell. He read scripture. He was quiet and polite. He had helped kill a sleeping man for insurance money, and the press treated him as the weaker party who had been led. Inside the courtroom, the two of them destroyed each other, exactly as the district attorney had intended. Gray testified that Ruth Snyder planned it, arranged it, and took part in it. Ruth Snyder testified that Gray was determined to do it, that she tried to talk him out of it, and that she believed she had. Judge Scudder told the jury that their job was to work out who had actually done what. On the 9th of May, they went out. They were back in 1 hour and 40 minutes. They convicted both of them of murder in the first degree. The sentence was death. 10,000 people gathered around that courthouse to watch them be taken away. 6 police motorcycles were waiting, 2 of them with armored sidecars and riflemen inside. The crowd waited all evening and never saw them. They were held over the weekend and moved quietly. They were taken up the Hudson to Sing Sing, and the appeals began. One appeal argued that Ruth Snyder was needed as a witness in a civil case. That civil case was an attempt to force 3 insurance companies to pay her father's policies to Lorraine. Think about the shape of that for a second. The money that got him killed, being claimed for his daughter. The appeal was dismissed. So was Judd Gray's, which argued that the joint trial had denied him a fair hearing. The governor of New York, Alfred E. Smith, was asked for clemency and refused it. The New York Times ran an editorial that said, in effect, that equal suffrage meant equal penalties. On the 12th of January, 1928, both sentences were carried out at Sing Sing. Ruth Snyder was 33. She was the 8th woman put to death for murder in the history of New York State. Judd Gray followed 6 minutes later. A reporter from a New York tabloid had strapped a camera to his ankle and smuggled it into the room. The photograph he took ran across the entire front page the next morning. It is one of the most reproduced photographs in American journalism, and it did not need to exist. Lorraine Snyder was 9 when her father was killed and 10 when her mother was executed. She was raised by relatives. Her name was in every newspaper in America before she was 11 years old. Judd Gray's daughter was younger still. 2 families lost a parent in this, not one. And then this case did something almost no case does. It went into the culture and stayed there. A novelist named James Cain had been a newspaperman in New York while all of this was happening. He wrote 2 short novels out of it, The Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity. The second one took its title from the clause in the policy, and it became one of the defining films of the 1940s. Every story you have ever seen about a wife, a lover, and an insurance policy comes down from this house in Queens. Here's what I keep coming back to. This was not a clever crime. There was no clever crime here at any point. The bindings were too loose. There was no bruise. The jewelry was under the mattress. The doors were untouched. And the pin they built the confession on was not even the lover's. It was the husband's. It carried the initials of the woman he had been engaged to before his marriage, Jessie Guischard. The keepsake of the dead woman his wife could never measure up to is what identified her lover to the police. Albert Snyder was 44. He was cold to his wife, and he was not a warm man, and none of that is a reason. He liked boats, and he liked to draw, and he was asleep in his own house. Two people planned this for months, and it survived contact with a detective for about 6 hours. It is remembered as a famous crime. It should be remembered as a warning about what people convince themselves is possible. If this one stayed with you, share it. And tell me in the comments which of the two of them you believe. Subscribe to Cold Case Redemption. A new case every week. I will see you in the next one.